picture this. It's a sweltering July afternoon in 1985.
Oh, the kind of heat that just completely drains you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A massive heat wave has descended on Seattle, pushing temperatures well past 90 degrees.
Which is miserable if you don't have AC.
Right. So you have to imagine you are a homicide detective. You've just stepped out of your air-conditioned car into the vibrant, cacophonous streets of Little Saigon.
The contrast alone is jarring.
It is. And you walk into the Tran jewelry market. The heat inside is absolutely stifling.
Like an oven, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it's what you see next that just, it freezes your blood. There is broken glass everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And behind a curtain in the back room, a man and a woman had been brutally executed.
It's just a horrifying scene to walk into.
Completely. But then, tucked away under a bed, you find a 7-year-old girl.
Just hiding there.
Hiding there, perfectly still. She's wearing a plaid skirt and white ankle socks.
School uniform, right? And she's mere feet from the bodies of her murdered parents. It's the kind of unimaginable trauma that permanently fractures a person's reality. I mean, the world stops being a safe place and instantly becomes a landscape of, predators and victims.
Yeah, that terrifying moment leaves us with a haunting question, which is really the foundation of today's deep dive. What kind of adult does that traumatized child become?
It's a heavy question.
It really is. Today, we're exploring Robert Dugoni's incredibly layered legal thriller, Her Cold Justice. But we aren't just reading a mystery here.
No, not at all.
We are using this story as a case study, basically, to pull back the curtain on how the justice system actually functions when no one is looking.
Which is often very different from what you see on TV.
Exactly. We're looking at the terrifying weight of circumstantial evidence, how legal narratives are weaponized in the courtroom, and, what happens when an ordinary, everyday person gets caught in a perfectly spun web.
And the mechanics of that web are fascinating, especially when you understand who is doing the spinning.
Right, because the story doesn't end in the jewelry market.
No, it doesn't, because the story of the 7-year-old girl on Tran, it keeps going. A year later, in 1986, the state brings a suspect to trial.
Okay.
A drifter named Andre Olson. But the police have a major problem. Their physical evidence is almost non-existent.
So they have nothing to tie him to the scene.
Practically nothing. So in this desperate attempt to secure a conviction, the prosecution makes a highly controversial move. They put 7-year-old Anna on the witness stand to identify the man who killed her parents.
Wait, they put a traumatized first grader on the stand in a homicide trial? That sounds like a recipe for an immediate mistrial.
Yeah.
How does that even play out?
It ends in total disaster, frankly.
Yeah.
And it's primarily because of how the child was prepared for her testimony.
Prepared, like coached.
Exactly. The defense attorney, this man named Seymour Wentworth, he systematically dismantles her credibility.
Oh, that's brutal to do to a kid.
It is. He gets on to admit on the stand that a child psychologist had been visiting her, using dolls to help her, quote-unquote, remember the event.
You're kidding.
No. The psychologist would point to a specific doll with white skin and dark hair and label it the bad man.
That is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, you aren't recovering a memory at that point.
Right.
You are essentially programming one into a highly suggestible child.
Exactly. And the psychological mechanism of that coaching completely backfires in the courtroom.
I can imagine.
When An is asked to look at a lineup of photographs and identify the killer, the pressure of the room and the fragility of that coached memory just collide.
Oh, no.
She hesitates, she becomes visibly confused, and she points to the completely wrong photograph.
Wow. So the prosecution's entire case just collapses on the spot.
On the spot, the man accused of killing her parents walks free.
So the system completely fails her. It demands that she relive her trauma in public, in front of a jury, and then it lets the person she believes killed her family walk right out the door.
Yeah.
That has to leave a permanent scar.
A scar that defines her entire career, really. Because if we fast forward to 2010, Anh Tran is no longer a scared child.
Right.
She is a prosecutor for the Seattle Police Department's shadowy ROPE team. That's the repeat offender program.
Okay, so she's going after the worst of the worst.
Exactly. And she is notoriously hands-on. She doesn't just sit in a downtown office reviewing files.
Oh, really?
No, she goes out on midnight raids in Little Saigon. She's wearing a ballistic helmet, carrying a 9mm Glock, and get this, typing up search warrants on her laptop in the back of a tactical van.
That is intense.
It is. The local newspapers eventually dub her the Batwoman because she outright refuses to ever offer a plea deal.
You know, you hear a story like that, and the initial reaction is usually to cheer. It sounds like a classic vigilante origin story.
Right, cleaning up the streets.
Exactly. She is cleaning up the streets that took her parents. But if you take a step back, the implications are actually terrifying.
How so?
Well, if your entire worldview as a prosecutor is forged in the fire of an unpunished murder, don't you risk looking at every single defendant who sits at the defense table as the monster who destroyed your family? Isn't her version of justice inherently compromised by her past?
That is exactly the whisper among her colleagues. Her trauma has birthed this intense, almost evangelical fervor for convictions at any cost.
Because she can't let anyone walk away again.
Right, because the justice system failed her when she relied on direct evidence, her own eyewitness identification.
Right.
So she had learned to play a completely different game. She has realized that direct evidence is fragile, but a compelling story, that is bulletproof.
Okay, so she leans into the narrative.
Exactly. Tran becomes a master of taking purely circumstantial evidence and theatrically spinning it into undeniable truth.
Wow.
And that specific psychological armor is what sets the stage for the present-day double homicide at the core of our analysis today.
Well, let's look at how she applies that armor. So it's December 4th. The temperature in South Seattle has dropped to 23 degrees. Freezing cold. Two detectives, Frank Rossi and Billy Ford, are called out to a modest Rambler home. And the scene they find is a puzzle that just contradicts itself at every turn.
It really does.
In the detached garage, a 43-year-old man named John Lockett has been shot execution style, while AC/DC's Thunderstruck blares from a stereo.
Such a bizarre detail.
So bizarre. Then, inside the main house, his girlfriend, Melissa Scott, has been brutally bludgeoned to death in her bedroom.
And the forensics of the scene immediately tell two completely different stories.
Right.
Out in the garage, there are no shell casings anywhere on the floor.
Meaning someone cleaned up.
Yeah. That means the shooter either took the time to painstakingly pick them up, or they used a revolver, which traps the casings in the cylinder. Either way, that is the hallmark of a cold, calculated, professional hit.
But then you go inside the house.
But when you walk into the house, the scene is chaotic. It has been violently ransacked. Drawers are pulled out. Clothes are thrown everywhere. Someone was tearing that house apart looking for something.
And here is the detail that absolutely shatters the logic of a typical robbery. Yes, the prize. Amidst all of this ransacking, the police find massive quantities of cash and heavy narcotics. Fentanyl, heroin, oxycodone.
Just lying there.
It isn't hidden in the floorboards. It's sitting out in plain sight, stuffed inside manila envelopes from a business called Blue Horizon Air Cargo.
Yeah.
I mean, leaving all that behind is like breaking into a bank, blowing the vault door completely off its hinges, and then only stealing the complimentary pens from the lobby.
It makes zero sense.
Right. If this was a drug ripoff, why on earth would the killers leave the actual prize sitting on the table?
That contradiction is exactly what catches Tran's attention when she arrives at the freezing crime scene.
What does she see that others don't?
Well, most people will look at the drugs and think the killers got spooked and ran before they could grab them. But Tran doesn't view crime scenes like normal people.
How does she view them?
She views them as stages. She looks at the left-behind drugs and cash and decides it isn't an oversight, it's a prop. It was deliberately left there to make the police think the murders were about a low-level drug dispute.
A decoy.
Exactly. And because the envelopes belong to Blue Horizon Air Cargo, which happens to be John Lockett's workplace, Tran immediately pivots. She decides the motive isn't in the house, it's at the cargo company.
Because she views the drugs as a stage prop, she now needs an actor to place on that stage.
Unfortunately.
And unfortunately for him, the detectives find the perfect unwitting actor in a 21-year-old college student named Michael Westbrook.
Yeah, Michael's involvement is just a masterclass in how a string of bad luck can completely destroy your life.
It's terrifying.
Michael works the graveyard shift at Blue Horizon with John Lockett. On the night of the murders, Michael's car won't start.
That's it, a broken down car.
Yep. So Lockett offers to give him a ride home. During the drive, Lockett casually asks Michael to hold on to 2 sealed Blue Horizon envelopes.
Let me guess, he lies about what's inside.
Of course. He claims they are surprise birthday gifts for his girlfriend that he needs to keep hidden for a few days.
It is the ultimate nightmare scenario.
Absolutely.
Because hours later, detectives Rossi and Ford kick down Michael's door with a search warrant. They find his work uniform on the bedroom floor, and sitting right next to it are those 2 sealed envelopes.
And they aren't birthday presents.
No. When they tear them open, they find a massive brick of fentanyl and $16,000 in cash.
And Michael's physical reaction to this discovery really seals his fate in the eyes of the police.
How so?
He suffers a massive panic attack right there in his living room.
Oh, man.
His vision tunnels, he feels like he can't breathe, and his fight or flight instinct just takes over. He tries to push his way out the front door just to get some air.
Which looks terrible to the cops.
Exactly. He ends up knocking over a police officer and has to be violently subdued by multiple detectives.
To the police, running away looks like absolute, undeniable guilt.
Right.
But we have to talk about how terrifying circumstantial evidence really is here. I mean, think of circumstantial evidence like a connect-the-dots puzzle. The prosecution has a piece of paper with dots numbered 1 through 10. They draw the lines, and the picture that emerges is a 21-year-old drug dealer who murdered his boss to take over the territory.
Because that's the picture they want to see.
Exactly. But Michael is screaming that he didn't know what was in those packages. If you borrow a friend's car to go to the grocery store and the police pull you over and find a stolen Rembrandt in the trunk, you're going to prison for art theft.
Yeah, good luck explaining that.
Right. How do you legally prove a negative? How does Michael possibly prove he didn't know what was in those packages?
The terrifying truth is that you often can't. And Tran banks heavily on that. She has the fentanyl, she has the money, she has the fact that Michael was the last person to see Lockett alive, and she has his physical attempt to flee the house.
It's a very convincing story.
It's an incredibly potent narrative cocktail. But Tran is also a brilliant legal strategist. She knows her actual physical evidence linking Michael to the murders themselves is weak.
Right, because they don't have the gun.
Exactly. They haven't found the murder weapon. There is no blood spatter on his work uniform. If she takes this to a standard preliminary hearing, a defense attorney will cross-examine the detectives and expose all of those glaring holes in open court.
So she doesn't do that. She completely bypasses the standard preliminary hearing.
Yep.
She uses a legal maneuver that feels like something out of a secretive tribunal, frankly. The grand jury.
Yeah, the grand jury is one of the most powerful tools a prosecutor has, precisely because of how it is structurally designed.
Walk us through that. How is it different?
In a standard trial, it's an adversarial process, right? The prosecution presents evidence and the defense attacks it. But a grand jury is entirely one-sided.
One-sided.
It takes place behind closed doors. There is no judge present in the room to referee. The defense attorney isn't allowed inside. The suspect isn't allowed inside.
That seems so unfair.
It does. Tran simply stands before a group of citizens and presents her curated version of the story. She tells them Michael was dealing drugs, saw an opportunity to take over the market, executed his boss, bludgeoned the girlfriend, and then left some drugs at the scene as a clever decoy.
Wow.
And because there is no defense attorney there to object or point out that Michael has a history of asthma and couldn't possibly overpower 2 people, the jury buys it.
Of course they do.
Tran easily secures a multi-count first-degree murder indictment.
But the narrative she builds isn't going to go unchallenged forever.
No, it's not.
This is where we get to look at the other side of the legal chessboard. Enter the defense attorney, Keera Duggan.
She is a fantastic character.
She really is. Keera is a brilliant former prosecutor herself who recently switched to criminal defense. She is also the daughter of Patsy Duggan, a legendary Seattle trial lawyer known to everyone as the Irish Brawler.
Quite the pedigree.
Yeah. And Keera gets pulled into this case by her law firm's private investigator, J.P. Harrison, who happens to be Michael's uncle.
And Keera takes one look at Tran's indictment and realizes she is walking into a buzzsaw.
She knows she's in trouble.
Oh, yeah. She knows that just poking holes in Tran's timeline won't be enough to save Michael. A jury needs a story to believe in.
Right.
So Keera has to build a compelling counter-narrative. In defense strategy, this is known as a SODDI defense, which stands for some other dude did it.
I love that acronym.
It's very literal. You don't just say your client is innocent. You provide a highly plausible alternative suspect.
And J.P. Harrison manages to find a massive, dangerous alternative.
He really does.
He leverages a contact he has at the DEA, an agent nicknamed Kuz. And Kuz quietly reveals that John Lockett wasn't just some local street-level dealer.
No, he was way bigger than that.
He had been under intense federal surveillance for months. Lockett was actually an importer for a massive, shadowy international drug cartel, and he was using Blue Horizon air cargo to move serious weight.
which completely changes the geometry of the case. Keera realizes that Lockett likely knew the feds were closing in on him. It is highly probable he was skimming drugs and cash from the cartel, realized they were going to send a hit squad after him, and used Michael as an unwitting mule to temporarily hide his stolen stash off-site.
Now, I understand needing an alternative suspect, but pushing back on this for a second, bringing a massive international drug cartel into the courtroom feels incredibly risky.
Oh, it's a huge gamble.
Right. If Keera stands up in front of a jury and proves that Lockett was moving major international weight, doesn't that inherently make Michael look completely guilty by association?
You'd think so.
I mean, they work the exact same graveyard shift. A jury's going to assume Michael was in on the cartel business.
That is the exact tightrope Keera has to walk, and it highlights a fundamental misunderstanding most people have about the legal standard of proof.
Which is what?
Keira's job is not to prove that Michael's a flawless angel. Her only objective is to inject reasonable doubt into Tran's narrative.
Just enough doubt to crack the story.
Exactly. By introducing the cartel element, Keera gives the jury an explanation that actually fits the physical crime scene far better than Tran's theory.
How so?
Well, remember the brutal bludgeoning of Melissa Scott?
Yeah.
Keira's investigator points out that pulling a trigger is one thing, but beating someone to death requires a level of physical stamina and cruelty that most people simply do not possess.
Oh, that makes sense.
A cartel hit squad sending a violent, bloody message over stolen drugs makes infinite logical sense. A 21-year-old asthmatic college student doing it makes almost none.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But how does she actually prove the cartel connection? Like, if the DEA has been watching Lockett, why not just subpoena the DEA agent and put him on the witness stand to tell the jury everything?
Because the federal government doesn't like playing in local courts.
Oh, really?
You can't just serve a subpoena to a federal agent and demand they show up at a state murder trial. There is a massive bureaucratic wall known as Toothy regulations.
Toothy regulations.
Yeah. Essentially, these are strict administrative rules that dictate exactly how and when a federal employee is allowed to testify in a local proceeding.
So it's red tape.
Tons of it. The Department of Justice has to review the request, and they routinely deny them to protect their own ongoing, larger investigations. Keera has to fight a legal war just to get the DEA's evidence into the courtroom.
Which brings us to the psychological warfare that takes place before the trial even begins. Because so much of the justice system happens outside the courtroom.
Most of it, honestly.
Right. So Tran and Keera have this incredibly tense meeting at McCoy's Firehouse Bar. Tran is sitting there, totally relaxed, watching a college basketball game, eating a burger, and drinking a beer.
Playing it cool.
Exactly. She drops the bomb that the grand jury has already indicted Michael, and she looks at Keera and flat out tells her, "I don't bluff. I have a full house, and you're not holding four of a kind."
It's such a bold line. It is a calculated intimidation tactic. Tran is trying to bully Keera into an early surrender.
But Keera doesn't blink.
No, she refuses to fold. She leans in and tells Tran a story about her father taking her to the racetrack when she was a kid.
I love this part.
He let her bet her $5 allowance on a 50-to-1 long-shot horse named Cipriani. Everyone thought it was a wasted bet. But the horse won.
A huge upset.
Right. And Keera uses that story to send a clear message back to Tran. Basically, until the race is finished, you never know who's going to win.
That interaction perfectly captures the sheer gamification of the legal system.
It really is a game to them.
Yeah, and when you look at what happens next at the arraignment, it's all theater. They are in front of Judge Ema Patel, who the defense bar secretly refers to as "I'm from hell."
Which is hilarious.
It is. So Tran purposely delays her entrance into the courtroom, blaming the quote-unquote ancient elevators just to make a dramatic, sweeping entrance that captures everyone's attention.
Total power move.
But Keera immediately counters by casually waiving Michael's right to a speedy trial.
Waiving the right to a speedy trial is a really fascinating defensive maneuver.
Why is that?
Normally, a defendant wants their trial to happen as fast as possible to get out of jail. But Keera knows that time is the prosecution's enemy. Witnesses forget things, evidence gets misplaced.
Right. The longer it takes, the weaker the memory.
Exactly. And most importantly, it buys her investigator, JP, the crucial weeks he needs to build that cartel defense and fight those toothy regulations to get the DEA on the record.
But the personal toll this gamification takes is staggering.
It really is.
I mean, Keera is fighting for a young man's life, battling federal bureaucracies and matching wits with a trauma-fueled prosecutor. Meanwhile, she still has to navigate her own messy life.
The human element.
Yeah, she's dealing with the emotional gut punch of seeing Detective Rossi, who she has complicated romantic feelings for, out on a date with someone else.
Ouch!
And she still has to show up to chaotic family dinners where her relatives are serving a plastic farting cake just to prank her sister Maggie.
The contrast is just wild.
It is such a stark reminder that these life-or-death legal battles are being fought by deeply flawed, exhausted people.
And that humanity is what makes the central conflict so compelling. The legal system, stripped of all its noble rhetoric, is basically an adversarial game of competing realities.
Competing realities, I like that.
Yeah. I mean, trans reality is simple, emotional, and backed by the infinite resources of the state. A drug dealer turned killer.
Clean and simple.
Right. Keera's reality is messy, complex, and deeply terrifying. An innocent kid used as a pawn by a cartel.
Much harder to sell.
It is. And the best advice Keera receives comes from her father, Patsy. He warns her not to get sucked into constantly refuting trans narrative.
Because then you're just playing defense.
Exactly. If you're only playing defense, you lose. You have to confidently force the jury to live inside your version of the story.
You know, when you lay all of these pieces out on the table, you realize how breathtakingly fragile freedom truly is.
It's unsettling.
We are looking at a young man, Michael Westbrook, who made a single mundane decision. His starter motor died, so he accepted a ride home from a coworker.
Yeah, a totally normal thing to do.
Right. And because of that one invisible domino falling, he suddenly finds himself trapped in a concrete cell, forced to defend his very life against the crushing weight of circumstantial evidence.
It forces you to realize that the line between living your normal life and fighting a first-degree murder charge can sometimes be as thin as being in the wrong car on the wrong night.
It is absolutely terrifying, and it leaves us with a profound, deeply unsettling question to consider long after this deep dive ends.
Yeah.
We know that Anh Tran's relentless, unforgiving pursuit of maximum convictions is fueled by the trauma of a broken system. A system that utterly failed her when she was a 7-year-old girl pointing at photographs in a courtroom.
She's a victim, too.
She is. But by treating every defendant like a monster, and by weaponizing circumstantial evidence to ensure she never loses, well, is she actually fixing that broken system today?
That's the million-dollar question.
Or has her trauma simply turned her into a new kind of monster, one perfectly willing to destroy an innocent life just to ensure she never has to feel powerless again? Think about that.